Watching Capital City Sunday.
Former President Donald Trump and his running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, worked to counter the Democratic National Convention with campaign rallies throughout the week. Vance was in Kenosha on Tuesday, just hours before Vice President Harris and her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, were set to take the stage at their campaign event in Milwaukee. Vance attacking Democrats on the issues of crime and public safety. Speaking outside of the Kenosha County Courthouse, Vance accused Democrats for the crime that happened during the 2020 protests there and doubled down on his promises to end sanctuary cities.
We're going to support the death penalty for drug dealers because they kill far more people than some of the most violent and vicious criminals. We have got to have real penalties for people who are killing our kids and poisoning our communities.
While Trump held a series of campaigns across battleground states aiming to pull the focus away from the convention in Chicago, Trump made a campaign stop in Arizona to draw a visual contrast on how he is approaching border security measures compared to Vice President Harris. Trump also toured Pennsylvania, Michigan, North Carolina, and Nevada last week. And independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. suspended his campaign for the presidency, endorsing former President Trump. Kennedy said he will withdraw his name from the ballot in 10 battleground states. Kennedy announced the endorsement through a court filing in Pennsylvania before giving a speech in Arizona. Trump held his own event in the same state later that evening. Joining me on the show this morning is John Leiber. John is the Wisconsin State Treasurer. John, thank you so much for being on the show with us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, John, you were on the ground in Milwaukee for the Republican National Convention. I want to get your post-reaction to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago.
Well, I will say it's a lot different experience watching it on TV than just being in the room. So, it's a lot easier to watch it. I actually think I saw more of the DNC because I wasn't running around doing delegate stuff. So it certainly is a show, and it's true what they say. It's a 4-day long infomercial. So in that respect, I feel like mechanically, I think they pulled off a good job of a show. They had a lot of celebrities, a lot of performers, but I think they were a little lacking on policy and what a lot of people wanted to hear. Some specifics on what they've been doing, what they plan to do in the next term.
Do you feel Trump's unwillingness to accept the results of national polling right now is going to impact him in the long term?
I think you have to take any polling numbers kind of with a grain of salt. And, I don't trust any exact numbers because the election's not being held today. It's being held in November. So what you have to look at more is kind of the momentum and the trajectory. And of course, there's going to be a polling bump for a convention. There always is. So whatever exact number it says right now, it's not always, the best thing to take, as gospel. And of course, campaigns do their internal polling. And of course, as we all know, Wisconsin's a swing state. Now, somebody may be leading by 20 points in Kentucky, but that doesn't really mean a lot for Wisconsin electoral vote. So if you're looking at the polls in the swing states, they're still tied. Now, the Democrats were down a couple months ago when Biden was still on the ticket. So, the Democrats are celebrating basically being tied where they need to be. And I wouldn't quite call that a victory yet. I think if they're, a little overconfident on the route, but again, the election's still not until November.
Some of your Republican colleagues have actually called on the former president to focus more on policy rather than personal attacks. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with that. I really do. I think, it's one thing to launch kind of attacks a year out from the election, but when it gets this close and when the voters are paying attention, they want to see real solutions and real answers, and they want to see an acknowledgement of what their concerns are. You can't make voters care about an issue they don't care about. You have to meet them where they are. And people are worried about the economy. They're worried about immigration. They're worried about safety. They're worried about things that affect their pocketbooks, like cost of groceries going up 20%, rent going up, electricity going up, gas going up, insurance going up. These things affect them every single day. I mean, I just the other day, I got a insurance renewal notice, and I turned my wife and said, I think this is a lot higher than last year. People notice that, and people want to hear somebody running for office talk about those issues that affect them. So that's really what I think should be the focus, because that's what people care about.
A message that was really driven home during the Democratic National Convention was about this bipartisan border and foreign aid supplemental that was introduced in the Senate and House earlier this year that ultimately stalled in the Senate, and Democrats are arguing that Republicans and ultimately former President Donald Trump chose to not move forward on that legislation that could have addressed the issues at the border. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have a comment to that?
Republicans are likely to take back the Senate. They're likely to hold the House. If you're saying you can't work with Republicans, then what kind of message does that send for the next 4 years? You need to be able to work across the aisle, and holding up the fact that you failed to work across the aisle in a bipartisan manner doesn't leave a lot of people, hope for the future. If you're saying, well, hopefully we'll just have our own party run everything and then we'll get things done. That doesn't happen very often in American politics. So I'd rather, if you're going to run on your failures, I think that's a questionable campaign choice. You should be promoting the successes. So the fact that they didn't get it passed isn't something good they should be trumpeting. That's their failure. They failed to get it passed. Now, whatever excuses they want to hold up, fine, but in the end, that was their bill. It didn't get through, and that's on them.
So you don't think that Republicans kind of intentionally chose not to support the deal, because there were Republicans that helped to draft the legislation?
Well, that happens in any legislature. There's deal making, there's negotiations, and if you're just going to say no, do it my way, or that's it, and the bill fails, well, you can't really blame the other side for not meeting you exactly where you want to be. You have to work with other sides. I mean, I remember President Biden's one of his big initiatives, or one of his campaign credentials, was that he could work in the legislature to get things through. Well, this didn't go through. You can't really say, well, it's the other guy's fault, not mine. It's a two-party system. It's divided government, and you have two branches. They have to work together to get things done. You can't blame the other side for everything. You have to actually put yourself out there and get something through. Maybe it's not exactly what you wanted, but that's what people wanted when they put in divided government like this. You have to meet somewhere in the middle, and if they were unwilling to do that or compromise, well, that's on the administration for not getting it through. It just strikes me as very odd that they're trying to tout their failure as some sort of success. It doesn't make sense.
Wisconsin State Treasurer John Leiber. John, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.